Why should we be doing this?
Okay, good afternoon everybody, and I'm conscious that you're probably really ready for your lunch and I'm in the graveyard slot, so I'll try and keep this as brief as possible. Is that okay? And anybody who wants to talk to me later about it, I'm very happy to engage with you. I suppose I'm going to skip the slides and I'm just going to kind of talk a little bit about my narrative. I've been working in the area, I'm really quite old, I've been working in the area the best part of 30 years. And I've worked in the area in Australia and then over the last 20 years in Ireland. And over that time I've seen great changes. I've also seen examples of very good practice, but sadly examples of very poor practice too. Practice bordering on abuse, really. And I guess towards the end of my career, I decided it was important to try to pull all these people's narratives together, really, because the narratives of people with dementia are thread through the book I've written, and really use the UN Convention as a prism to interrogate dementia policy and practice, to look at the issues that are really important in people's lives, like the right to getting a diagnosis, the right to its sensitive and ethical disclosure, the right to a multidisciplinary assessment that would lead on to good rehabilitation services, the right to live in the community, Article 19, with adequate support to allow a person choose to live in a place of their wish, and onwards and upwards to rights in residential care. This morning we heard the beautiful narrative of the man talking about the garden, but how many people in residential care are locked into settings where on a day like today they look out through windows and there's no access? Is that fair? Is that just? Is that human? And I guess in terms of messages in the book, and of course Anne talked and beautifully reframed dementia as a disability, but reframing dementia as a human rights issue, as a social justice issue, we need to think about concepts like participation, equality, autonomy. What does autonomy mean to the life of a person with dementia? If as soon as they've got a diagnosis, all their freedoms to choose are removed from them, What does that say about their dignity, about their kind of quality of life? So issues like that are so important. And the book has really tried to really put the person at the centre stage and try to challenge power relations, because for so long the biomedical model has been so dominant, hasn't it? And at the end of the day, listening to the wonderful presentations this morning, what exactly is being achieved at the moment? So if we can reframe dementia as a disability and a human rights issue, there is hope. We can think about reablement. We can think about getting retained abilities. We can think about working with what the person can still do. So again, just very briefly in terms of messages in the book, one core message is that dementia may strip people of their cognitive functioning and of their memory. It clearly does not take away their humanity. It's people like us deemed cognitively intact or healthy that do this, isn't it? By our attitudes that we've heard about this morning, our nihilistic attitudes, by the environment that's so maladapted to the person, and by policies that are often really nihilistic and focusing on burden and costs and all the negative things, and not on, assets, on, how can we help a person flourish who has a dementia? How can we promote their dignity? How can we produce care that's dignity enhancing and stuff like that? And of course, these issues, trying to promote people's dignity, that doesn't cost a lot. It's our attitudes. It's trying to kind of really bring out the best in a person. The second key message then is very much about the fact that good dementia care is not cheap care, is it? We all know that to get, skilled staff and to get the right skill mix and to get the right environment requires resources. And if we believe in human rights, we really need to come together and lobby for more resources in dementia care. And we really must work to improving things and to ensuring that people are offered both pharmacological interventions and non-pharmacological interventions. If you think about post-diagnostic services, cognitive rehabilitation services, cognitive stimulation therapy, and a whole host of other interventions that work probably as well, if not better, than some of the drugs. But the evidence is weak because, of course, it's so difficult to do randomized controlled trials in these areas. The third point is language, and that was beautifully picked up by Anne. You know, the language in dementia care is so appalling. It really gets to me, you know, the victims and the sufferers and the hidden victims as the carers. And then, you know, when the media get on about, you know, prevalence rates, the tsunami of dementia and, you know, the rising tide, all sensational language. People with dementia are people like you and me and people out there who are human and who, you know, are no different from the rest of us. By othering people with dementia, we're really reinforcing stigma, and we're clearly making things worse for the individual. And we really have to work hard on that, to get rid of those words that are so emotive and offensive and disrespectful, really. And the way forward, the UN Convention, I'm not going to, it's quite a complex tool. I used it in the book to try to really examine dementia policy and to look at the evidence and see what's happening out there. And clearly we can do a lot better. And I love the comment from Agnes Houston this morning. You have to ask, you won't be offered. If you don't have the knowledge to ask, if people don't know, as an example, about cognitive rehabilitation services, how will we ever get those services up and running in the country? So really, people have to be kind of kept well informed and to ask for help. In terms of, I'm finishing up, and so the book, as I said, goes through all of these areas. It particularly hones in on Article 12, which is legal capacity, the rights people have to be treated equally before the law. And we do have here in Ireland a new Assisted Decision-Making Capacity Act, which is really offering people much more autonomy, and a much less restrictive view of autonomy is kind of clearly embedded in that new legislation. And then Article 19, the right to live in a place of your choice, is so important and can be used by people lobbying for services. And the UN Convention can also be used by people who are working in the industry, who want to interrogate practice, who want to get better resources. So it's a very useful tool. So to finish up, the country is really at a critical juncture, I believe, in terms of the national strategy being rolled out. We waited long enough, God knows, for that, didn't we? And now it's being implemented. And then I get so disheartened when I hear stories of all this huge money, ring-fence money for the first time in Ireland going into dementia, and services closing down quite close to where we are in County Mayo. What's it all about? So we have the dementia strategy. At least we have, we've got the Tony Foley's programme going on in Cork. We've got the intensive home care packages going on. We've got the stigma programme. But these programmes won't work unless the funding is continued. And we need to really be pushing for that too. The country, as we know, has recently ratified the UN Convention, but what does that mean? It puts obligations on the government to do things, to set up a focal point in the government, ideally in the Taoiseach's office, so that whoever is working in that focus area will be cross-checking policies to make sure that they comply with the UN Convention. And that's where the Alzheimer's Society, in my view, have a role too, having people with dementia be in that kind of area to watch that space and to monitor what's going on. Ratifying the convention also means that people, service providers out there in the disability sector and in dementia, need to be trained in human rights. And it's not rocket science. It's building on oftentimes, what the average professional has learned through their professional ethics, building on person-centred principles. We have the Charter of Human Rights, which was, again, work at least done by the Alzheimer's Society and launched about 2 years ago. But what good are these things if they're not activated? So, we really need to work together to making sure that people's rights are respected. Most importantly, of course, we have a very powerful self-advocacy group, and I think that the work that people like Helen and Kathy Ryan and Ronan Smith and all of the people are doing around the country is fantastic, because it really is levelling the playing field. And what's more powerful than the authoritative voice of a person who experiences the illness and who really knows what they're talking about? So just to sum up, in my view, we've come a long way. we clearly, there's hope on the horizon. We have a new World Health Organization global action plan on dementia, heavily embedded in human rights, and with particular reference to the UN Convention as well. And countries are expected to report to the ADI, Alzheimer's Disease International, with their progress on how, you know, their respective policy plans are complying with that overall global plan. All that said, with all the positives going on, we can't afford to be complacent. We must work together. I'm sick of silos and people thinking they own the dementia territory. We all need, as Helen said at the opening this morning, we need to work together collaboratively, respecting different professional input and really making a change. So I'm going to leave it at that, and thank you for listening to me. I'm so conscious you're racing for your lunch, so thank you for listening to me.